Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and we're taking a look today at a new keyboard from Razer. This is their Huntsman Elite gaming keyboard, and it sounds like your run-of-the-mill mechanical gaming keyboard with those super loud keys, but inside it works a little differently. It has an optical sensor on each key to register the key press versus an electrical connection that we typically see on keyboards. And Razer says this will result in a longer lifespan for the keyboard and possibly a little less latency as well. So we're going to be taking a closer look at what makes this keyboard tick in just a second. But I do want to let you know, in the interest of full disclosure, that this came in free of charge through the Amazon Vine program. However, all the opinions you're about to hear are my own. Nobody is paying for this review, nor has anyone reviewed or approved what you're about to see before I uploaded it. So let's get into it now and see what this keyboard is all about. So let's take a closer look now at the hardware. There are two configurations on this keyboard. This is the Elite configuration that costs $200. There's also a regular Huntsman keyboard, not an Elite. That one costs $149. What the Elite gets you are these multimedia controls here at the top, along with this dial control. You can configure all of these things, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. And then you also get a wrist rest with the Elite version that lights up. So when I attach the wrist rest here, you can see it begins lighting up, and I've got this light that will continue around the side of the keyboard. If I remove it here, you'll see that the front of the keyboard here will retain that lighting as well, and there's a little connector here that it docks to. It comes together pretty nicely and very quickly comes to life there. It's very comfortable too. It's a padded fake leather, and Corey, who works for us here on the channel, has one of these things, and he says it holds up pretty well over time, so the quality feels pretty nice here. The keyboard itself feels pretty solid. It's got a good weight to it. The keys are, as you can hear, very noisy. What some folks are saying is that this mirrors kind of the cherry blue switches. So it feels like a lighter key to me. I like a little heavier key when I'm typing, which is what I do mostly on my computer. So this one is certainly a lot more sensitive, and we'll look at some of the key actuations in a minute. You have an RGB lighting system here. I'll show you the software you can use to configure that. You can get very granular in how these keys are lit. So we'll walk through some of that in a minute as well. And it feels overall like a very nicely put together piece of hardware. Now, like most mechanical keyboards, it's very easy to pull these keycaps off to keep things clean. And underneath it is the key mechanism. My understanding on these keycaps is that they are compatible with Cherry, so you should be able to find different keycaps if you want for your keyboard here, and that's what it looks like there. Now, the mechanism here looks a lot like a traditional mechanical keyboard mechanism, but inside is a light sensor that gets tripped when you push the key down, and that is what actuates your key press. This light here actually is not the sensor, though. That is the backlighting for the keyboard. And I found the keyboard to be very, very sensitive in addition to being very noisy. And I'll show you here with the 0 key what it takes to get a key initiated here. Very little here. They say it's about 1.5 millimeters before something actuates. And I'm seeing that it's actuating very quickly once I hear that click. So what you're looking at here is a slow motion video I shot with my iPhone at 240 frames per second. And what we're looking for is how long it takes for something to register on screen. In this case, a 0, as you can see, that just popped up there after the key is pressed. Now, typically with game controllers, this is a easier test to do because the button gets pushed and you can see how long it takes for that to register. These keyboards are tougher to measure in this way because this keyboard in particular has a 1.5 millimeter actuation rate, which means the key is pushed down 1.5 millimeters before something is actuated. But the entire keyboard travel is 3.5 millimeters, so it's really hard to measure exactly what the latency is. So you can take like a best guesstimate as to where things actually initiate. So if I look at it based on what we just saw a minute ago, maybe we start it here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 key presses before we see that 0 begin to appear on screen. That translates out to about 28 milliseconds, give or take. Very fast, actually, especially given that if I have a NES controller hooked up to a CRT television, I was measuring about that amount of latency there, too. So not all that bad for a USB keyboard here. This was plugged into my gaming PC, running out to a monitor at 144 hertz. So I can say that it's definitely very, very fast, but is it any faster than other mechanical keyboards? Probably not, or at least not in a way that any human can measure. These things are really fast to begin with, including the traditional mechanical keyboards, so it's very difficult to say that this one is so much faster than some other Razer keyboard or another cherry-based keyboard, for example. But it is very, very quick and performs as well as a traditional mechanical keyboard does, so that is one thing going for it. One thing, of course, that's going to be very difficult to test is the overall lifespan here. They're basically saying you'll get double the number of key presses before the keys wear out on this keyboard versus a traditional mechanical keyboard. That may or may not be the case. It's hard to say, but maybe in a few years we'll have to come back and take a look at that. So let's take a look now and see how you can configure the keyboard. This one, like many other Razer products, uses the Synapse software to get all of this stuff configured on it. I'm not going to go into a total deep dive on here, but I'll cover some of the highlights. So what you'll see here when you first log into the software is that you've got an option for gaming mode. And when you turn this on, what it does is disables the Windows key here, because if you're in the middle of a game, this happens to me sometimes, you get a little too excited, you hit the Windows key and it pops you out of the game. This will prevent that accidental key press by essentially disabling that Windows key on the keyboard. And while that's on, you'll have an indicator here on the keyboard right over on the side here to indicate that that mode is on. So if you're trying to hit your Windows key and nothing is happening, you look at that light, you'll know that you're on gaming mode. And there's an option to have it only come on when you're in a game, or you can leave it off all the time. And what you can do on each key is dive a little deeper into the function of it. So for example, I can click on the H here and I can have the H do something else. Of course, this is very limiting in the sense that you lose the control of your H key to some other function, but you can go in and assign macros to specific keys, for example. So if you have a game where you want a whole bunch of stuff to fire off with a key you're not usually pushing, you can configure the key to do that. And then you can set a profile in the software here, as you can see, to have that take over when that game is launched, and then when you leave the game, you can go back to having your H key be an H key again. But I was a bit disappointed that it doesn't have any dedicated macro keys for that purpose. So the only way you're going to get any kind of macro going on here is to replace the function of one of the existing keys on the keyboard. So bear that in mind. There are other keyboards that cost around this price point that actually have a usable macro row so that you don't have to give up another key in the process here. So just a little thing to keep in mind on that. It also has the ability to store some of the profiles inside the keyboard itself. So if you're jumping around to different computers, you can have those specific macros and profiles follow you around. There's also a cloud function too, where you can store those profiles up on Razer's servers for retrieval later. Now, in the absence of a macro row, though, you do have the option on the Elite keyboard to configure these multimedia keys to do something different. So on the keyboard here, we've got these three keys plus the dial here. So you could go into that and perhaps set these things up to do something different. So you can do macros, of course, or do some kind of mouse function. One thing you can do here on the dial is not only set what the button on the dial does, but also movement. So if you're moving the dial in the downward direction, you can have it do a couple of different things beyond just volume control. So you can turn your microphone up or down. You can look at doing scrolling up or down when you're looking at a web page or something. So there's a lot of different things that you can do with this row here that might work well as a macro row if you're not going to be using those multimedia controls. Let's take a look now at lighting, and you've got some options for that too. So if you don't really care about your lighting here, you can just choose through a couple of quick things to do, like starlight or a ripple going through your keyboard or something, and just set the starting color for that and go from there. But if you want to do more advanced things like a per key kind of control, you can go into their advanced effects, into the Chroma Studio, where you can really get granular with it. And what's crazy here is how granular you can get. So let's attach the wrist rest here to the keyboard again. You can see it getting registered in the software immediately. And what's really cool is that every one of these little boxes here can be configured with a different color. So even though it looks pretty uniform on the bottom of the wrist rest here, you can actually change the color quite individually here across the way. So what we're going to do is grab static here on the left-hand side, and we're going to put that above spectrum cycling because this works a lot like Photoshop, where whatever is on the top will take precedent over what's beneath it. And what I want to do maybe is change these two portions here to green. So I'm going to go over to the keyboard here and just select this area here to be green along with this one and maybe that one, and then maybe the corner I want to be blue. Let's try that real quick. I'm going to click on Save now, and when I do that, you can see now the lights are all different, and we're still cycling on the other lights there. So you have a lot of control over how this looks, and you can even go into individual keys here and maybe set a couple of these to blue while it cycles through the rest of it. So you can spend a lot of time in here, and you can set up profiles on this section just like you did with your macros and everything else. So the overall gaming experience on the keyboard feels pretty nice. As you saw earlier, it is very responsive, and as you are running around the world here, things do react very, very quickly. So it does feel like a premium gaming product. Again, I can't really say if it's any better or worse than a traditional cherry-based mechanical keyboard. I certainly don't play any better, but it does feel as responsive as a keyboard at this price should be. And I found the wrist rest to be very comfortable too. And of course, you could always detach it and move it further out if you want, although you lose the light when you do that. So altogether, I'm pretty pleased with this one. It certainly is a premium price tag on it, but I think if you are in the market for this type of keyboard, it certainly didn't disappoint me. It feels very well built. Again, the keys do feel a little lighter to me than I prefer, especially for typing. I like my mechanical keyboards to be a little heavier in how their keys feel. But if you are looking for something really featherweight and sensitive, this keyboard certainly will do it for you. And again, if you go with the Elite, you've got some macro options that you can apply on the multimedia row up there. So that is the Huntsman Elite from Razer. And until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters Chris Allegretta, the Four Guys with Quarters podcast, Tom Albrecht, Gerard Newberg, and Kalyan Kumar. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to lon.tv/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit lon.tv/s.